education. I'll just get right into this. So who am I? By day, I work in marketing and communications for a security company. Once upon a time, though, I worked to integrate technology and social media into a classroom of about 3,000 students at Virginia Tech. No big deal. We did a couple of cool things. We Skyped with some Nobel Peace Prize winners. We might have gotten in touch with the Prime Minister of Australia once on Twitter. And we even invited King Abdullah of Jordan to our class, you know, just to hang out, just for funsies, just for a regular lesson. I like to dabble in code sometimes. I have a thing for hacker conferences. And I can frequently be found yelling on Twitter about tacos, dinosaurs, and recently puppies. Sorry, can't help it. So we've all dreamed about hacking into a computer to avoid doing homework or to change a few bad grades. If you came to my talk to learn how to do this, sorry, I'm not going to be able to help you out. If you came to my talk to figure out how to do this for your kids, definitely not going to be able to help you out with that either. What my talk will do is give an overview of the state of security in education and education technology. Poor security practices that are industry-wide really make hacking education less difficult than you might think. So over the past few years, there's been a massive influx of investment money and resources into education technology. Education reform advocates treat technology as a silver bullet that's supposed to fix all of the societal ills that take place in schools. It's also supposed to somehow magically reverse the effects of poverty on students. Technology is also seen as a solution to poor student achievement, and because of its potential, and it does have great potential to positively impact learning, there's a huge rush to get technology into classrooms, into schools, and into the hands of students. As an industry, education technology tends to raise less investment money than consumer technology. According to the Gates Foundation, education has the lowest research and development budgets of any other industry out there. And just as education and teaching don't attract the best and brightest talent into classrooms, education technology doesn't attract the best and brightest engineering talent to technology companies either. Typically, education technology companies operate with limited resources. They're pressured to launch products as quickly as they can in difficult market conditions, and one of the first places they start to skimp when they're looking for time to save is security. To developers in education technology, security is this unnecessary, expensive thing. Good job, guys. Way to value your user data. Sometimes they claim that security will slow down the website, but we all know that if you're doing security right, it shouldn't slow down your site at all. It doesn't matter that there are free open source software solutions available that can be easily implemented from the ground up. A lot of education technology companies simply start to build now and then refactor with security in mind later. In the terms of service and privacy policies of education technology apps, there are a couple of words that are pretty common: commercially reasonable and industry standard practices. But what actually are these practices? Few companies are proactive enough to take the time to write up a document that says what kind of encryption they use or whether that they've employed TLS in their web traffic servers. In terms of password storage, 4 of 7 popular education apps that I took a look at recently actually store passwords in plain text, especially for student accounts. In terms of two-factor authentication, it just doesn't exist. It's extremely rare, and it's only available in schools to educators who use enterprise products like Dropbox or Google Apps in the classroom. In terms of encryption, this is something that's typically only implemented on login pages for websites, not full sessions. A plugin like Firesheep could really easily be used to hijack a student's entire homework session. And this is something that recently happened with a popular education technology tool called Edmodo. It has since been fixed, but in 2013, Edmodo, which is a Facebook for Schools sort of project that lets teachers, students, and parents connect with one another, a concerned parent started poking around just to see how much of his student's data might be bleeding out of his homework tool. When the parent poked around, he discovered, whoa, what was that? Literally. When the parent poked around and discovered this issue, he approached Edmodo and said, hey, what's going on here? This isn't something that's new. It's something the industry had seen before that had happened to Facebook in 2011. Edmodo's official response was, yeah, so we have full session encryption, but it's an opt-in feature. If the school wants to use it, you have to request it. Because every single educator and every single tech coordinator at every school using Edmodo knows that the option exists, and then they're going to take the time to figure out what encryption is and opt into it on the Edmodo platform. In terms of testing and patching, these are things that just don't happen in education technologies. Tools are tested for usability, and they have high uptime requirements, so companies are just less likely to make massive patches during the school year. Development typically happens in bursts, so it's something that happens during a summer break or a winter holiday. In terms of patching, there was one security researcher who shared with me that education companies, one specific education company that he was aware of, had served malware to its users for about 7 months. So it was lurking around in some servers, pretty much undetected. No one knew about it. When they found it, they cleaned it up, they got rid of it, but they didn't disclose this to all of their users. Way to go, guys. Way to go. Good job. In terms of disclosure as well, responsible disclosure programs are either rare or hard to find in education technologies. Smaller companies typically don't have the resources or the relationships necessary to run and to coordinate disclosure. Additionally, there are pretty uneven application of laws in security and technology, so many educators are afraid of how these laws might be warped and used against them if they did find themselves in a disclosure, in an issue with disclosure in education. There's one specific case that took place in Australia in 2011 where a university asked for an independent audit of a learning management system called Blackboard. In this particular audit, the researchers found 84 different vulnerabilities of varying criticality, including multiple critical issues that left no trace of exploit behind if a student decided to use them to, say, change data, fake successful course completion to make it to graduation. The security company actually disclosed these vulnerabilities, and it took more than a month to get a reply from the company. Blackboard initially rejected the criticality, denied that the issues existed, and then took the better part of a year to roll out the patches to their learning management system. So the school that requested the audit ultimately was left with its hands tied. They had already paid thousands of dollars per educator to use this tool for the school year, and then they weren't even sure if it was safe to use or not. Education companies in general do store more information than just usernames and passwords linked to personal identifying information. At the university level, education tools hold research and communications among students and among colleagues. There are tons of collaborative education programs that will capture and store data with extremely sensitive information. At the K-12 level, there are tons of new tools that track student learning. There are adaptive technologies that basically learn what students know and then figure out how best to teach them what they don't know. There are a few examples of this like Newton and Grocket that store sensitive analytics on learning and comprehension and even information about remedial coursework that students might need to go through for content mastery. Additionally, there are numerous behavioral technologies that are used to track special education and guidance counseling. These act really as instructional support, and they transmit sensitive information between special education teachers about mental health and about behavior. Most of this is actually covered by HIPAA. In terms of content distribution channels, we're talking about the places where kids do their math homework or they learn how to code. Most of these only store grade information. They will have some personal identifying information like a username and a password. And in some extreme cases, there are companies like code.org that request a full education background of students so that they can try to use big data to solve their greater mission of teaching kids how to code and how to use technology better. Learning management systems like Blackboard, Edmodo, Scholar, Moodle, pretty much everything you can imagine that goes on between a teacher, students, and anything else in the classroom is here. So in these programs, you're going to find things like rosters, parent information, grade information, classroom communications again, and sensitive contact information. There are other programs that schools have begun starting to use, like Clever and LearnSprout, and these are programs that do data storage and warehousing. They're going to store your standardized test scores. They're going to keep track of personal identifying information, things like attendance, teacher effectiveness records, and all kinds of other records that schools are now starting to store and crunch because big data. If some of this information ends up leaked and permanently connected to a student's identity, this could be big trouble for these kids' futures. Information about disability, abuse, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, poor academic performance, and disciplinary issues could be abused and could be used to actually discriminate upon the students that education is trying to help do better in the world. We're not talking about collecting and crunching the data that's generated by a whole bunch of middle and high school children either. We're talking about kids who are as young as kindergartners, who can barely read, and who are generating hundreds of data points a day. Even if their learning profiles and their performance data are anonymized, it's possible to de-anonymize this data and trace it back to the users who generated it. The data trails that these kids are starting in the classroom could pretty much end up following them for the rest of their natural lives, and potentially until the end of all time if someone figures out how to monetize that. No word yet on if that's happened. Education technology companies aren't the only places that store massive quantities of student data, though. Schools love to capture, collect, and store data pretty much until the end of all time as well. They have little to no budget for infrastructure and few resources to implement the security that they need to really do it. Additionally, school network setups vary wildly based on the amount of money available to a particular school. They have a difficult time finding the tools that they need to solve their individual education problems. And even though it's 2014, there are plenty of schools that still rely on manual data entry into legacy siloed systems to manage student information. At the university level, only about 25 to 40% of universities actually end up encrypting the information in a student information system. There are no solid numbers on this for K-12 education, but the numbers are probably the same, if not a little bit lower. Additionally, money is going to dictate whether schools are able to use computer labs where students share machines, whether they can implement a bring your own device program where schools have loaner devices, but then students maintain the devices they use on a daily basis, or whether they can institute one-on-one programs where schools end up managing hardware, like laptops, Chromebooks, iPads, you name it. In most cases, especially in the case of teachers, there's going to be a massive commingling of professional or educational and personal data. There's little to no network segmentation in K-12 environments between school and student data, so all of this is basically going to be swimming around the same Wi-Fi network, when really it should be separated, the same way that we try to separate church and state. The poorest of schools also have serious infrastructure issues. They're typically running on obsolete equipment, and they can't upgrade to the latest and greatest software because of hardware constraints that they incur. A great example of this is actually in K-12 education, where 94% of schools are still using Windows XP. By the way, that's no longer being supported by Microsoft as of, I think it was May 8th, so yay! More 0 days for everyone? Oops. It's okay. Additionally, schools really love to use ancient versions of Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer 8 tends to be pretty popular. One classroom in Palo Alto that I visited was actually, and this was in 2013, they were actually using Firefox 4, which was like 11 to 8 billion Firefoxes ago. I don't know if anybody wants to help with the math there. Patching and updating infrastructure in schools is also pretty difficult. Most users have to install don't have install permissions in a lab or a rotational learning environment. So software is going to be upgraded maybe once or twice a year. And even if schools do have newer hardware, they're going to be disabling any kind of auto-update software, especially in browsers, that might interfere with monitoring and filtering software that they use to keep track of what kids are doing all day. For schools that have implemented mobile device programs, there are also problems. iOS doesn't get updated very regularly in schools because in mid-September, well, that's when the new version of iOS comes out. So that's about 3 weeks after devices are assigned for the school year, and it's pretty hard for these things to be coordinated in some schools. When it comes to individual apps, just forget it, don't even try. There's no scheduling trick that technology coordinators are going to be able to implement that's going to help them keep up with patching the tools that students use. Most IT management in schools is actually focused on filtering and blocking traffic on the web. It's not actually focused on securing systems that store student data. Most of the blocking that's done in education environments is done to comply with E-rate, which is a federal law that basically says, kids, you are not allowed to watch porn in schools, and you cannot go to any blogs or any websites that we do not like, or we're taking your internet away. There's a new trend in schools as well, where software is purchased to monitor social media posts and activities, or to even block these activities from being able to take place on school grounds. But it sends a really weird message. There are people who are out there saying that student privacy is important, and kids should totally have privacy, by the way, but we are going to go ahead and watch your every move that you do while you're on school grounds just to make sure that you're like all private and secure and stuff. Okay, kids? Sound good? The thing about this is that kids are really smart. They find workarounds. There's no one more determined than a 12-year-old who really wants to see Justin Bieber, sorry girls, who's going to get through a system and hack away around filtering software set up against them. In school and on Twitter, kids are asking each other, hey, have you heard about this purple onion Tor thing? It gets around the blacklisted sites that we have in school all day. So let's use it and do whatever we want when our teachers aren't looking. In another case, and this happened in Los Angeles, LAUSD spent about $10 million on an iPad program. So that's $10 million worth of iPads for a whole bunch of students who could totally benefit from them, and the kids got their hands on them. Well, the kids who got their hands on the iPads are now labeled hackers because doing anything with technology that's given to you that you shouldn't is bad. Hacking is bad, folks. And these kids were able to jailbreak their iPads in just a few days. What ended up happening is that the iPads were confiscated from the kids, and now they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere pretty much being unused because the school system hasn't figured out how to keep kids from jailbreaking this software that they've installed. As if that's not enough, in addition to these infrastructure issues, there's another problem. Teachers. Teachers are great, except teachers suck. Teachers suck at security. For anybody watching this on YouTube, I said teachers suck at security. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. Educators tend to be early adopters of technology, but they're incredibly poor judges of risk. They're more concerned with having access to the tools that they use in the classroom than actually securing the data that's locked inside of them. They don't want to lose instruction time. They don't want to lose control of the classroom. And typically, educators are unaware of the individual responsibility that they have in protecting their students' privacy. Educators tend to not read the entire terms of service or privacy policy of a new tool that they adopt, and they think nothing of uploading live student data to a new tool without checking who retains the rights to that data. If the educator abandons the tool, they typically forget to go back and go ahead and delete everything and remove all traces of things that they've shared in the program. This doesn't even begin to touch other issues with information security in schools. Phishing, malware, whatever's going to be out there to replace CryptoLocker. Educators tend to talk endlessly about modeling digital literacy, and security is a very important aspect of that. But that's something that's poorly modeled for students. In addition to this, educators just don't think that they're going to be hacked or under attack. That's something that happens to someone else. Never mind that standardized testing in schools has created a very high-stakes system, and the conditions are perfect for the typical motivations that drive hackers to take place. There are cases where students have used keyloggers to gain access to a student information system, and to change their grades because they wanted to avoid a really, really bad report card review with mom and dad. There are other situations where parents have hacked into school systems to change their kids' grades before a college entrance exam or before transcripts went out. There's nothing out there that really requires educators or schools to set bare minimum rules for security, compliance, and infrastructure. And not even the laws that are meant to protect student data, like FERPA and COPPA, do this either. COPPA, which is the Children's Online Protection and Privacy Act, is basically, it's the reason that you have to do math every time that you sign up for an email address. You have to pretty much prove that you can come up with numbers older than 13 so that you can send and receive messages on the internet. FERPA, which is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, is the law that says that pretty much all grades are private and any kind of grade disclosure involves parental consent when you're dealing with minors. Both of these laws are irregularly enforced and they're pretty toothless. They fail to define and establish important aspects of privacy for students, and the laws don't create minimum encryption and transmission standards for personal identifying information and for data. They also don't establish standards for how data should be treated in longitudinal studies or how data collection should take place when it's being stored pretty much until the end of the world. Instead, the majority of the new laws out there that are affecting that address student privacy and online tracking, like a very originally named law called Do Not Track Kids, these are focused on consumer tracking technologies and advertising technologies that pop up in the games and the apps that kids use to entertain themselves. There should be better laws that cover education technologies used in schools, though. Education is one of the most heavily data mined and industries that there is on Earth. The laws that exist should prevent student data from changing hands without any kind of end user or parent consent. At least in consumer tech, when you use Google or you use Twitter, you get to retain the rights to your data. And they only really hold on to some metadata that's knocking around the servers. Education technology companies, they don't do that. And 93% of the time, when administrators are negotiating contracts with education technology companies, they don't actually realize that they have the rights to negotiate and to retain the ownership of their student data. A lot of these problems aren't new. They happen in consumer technology too. If you take a look at the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, for example, and what happened with Andrew Armheimer, the legal part of this is a nightmare. Consumer technology laws are about 15 to 20 years behind what's actually going to be taking place in technology at any given moment. And how can we expect this to get better for students when there are so many lobbyists and so many private interests at play? It's a political game, and if it's not taken care of in consumer tech, how can we expect for this to be fixed in education? Right now, it's pretty much the wild, wild west, and all the way around, there are really no incentives for anyone to self-regulate or to fix this problem. And this is also problematic because despite the questionable legality of data being sold, there are cases where schools have been known to sell student data for profit and for income. This isn't something that's new. For a long time now, schools have sold lists of prospective students to college admissions officers at universities, but this isn't how things should be done. There's a whole industry of data brokers out there now who are known for doing some pretty nefarious and some pretty shady things to track data and to hoard as much information as they can about consumers who are just knocking around the web. A lot of them are under investigation because they don't allow consumers to access these massive profiles that contain hundreds of data points that have been gleaned from bajillions of transactions on the internet. But what happens, in some cases, the information that these data brokers are able to get from the internet is worth quite a bit of money. The lifetime value of an email address to a data broker, and this is just an email address, is about $101. What about all the other data that's just knocking around out there and leaking from school infrastructure systems? We're not just talking about data that could be used for advertising. We're talking about student performance data. We're talking about testing scores. We're talking about behavioral issues. We're talking about familial background and all kinds of other information that could be used as deciders for important milestones and life events. What happens if there's some sort of correlation between low test scores? Do student interest loans increase in rate size? Not ideal. What happens if a remedial course triggers some sort of advertisement for a questionable education tool? Or what if information about suicidal tendencies, depression, or a history of abuse about a student get leaked out and are combined with a consumer profile? Additionally, what could happen if people who do really, really, really badly on fractions, like me, in like 3rd grade, just happen to maybe not keep track of the 8,500 times their student loan people like to sell their student loan around and maybe miss a payment here or there? It happens. Do you get tracked? And do you have all kinds of crazy information follow you because of this? Education's supposed to be a great democratizer. It's supposed to be a great equalizer, and the technology that people are building should really facilitate that. We need to be doing everything in our power that we can to shut down the tools that compromise student privacy and put it in danger. Technology adoption in schools is the future. It's here, and it's not going to go away. The industry's years behind consumer technology and privacy protections. Schools rely on outdated, insecure infrastructure, and educators are pretty much blissfully unaware of their responsibility in protecting school and student data. There's little oversight on how data should be handled and how it should be protected by law. And this sucks because kids are being encouraged to develop online voices. They're being encouraged to develop personas, and they're not being given the tools and the skills that they need to secure, to navigate, and protect themselves online. If we're going to fix this, we really, really need to hack it. Teachers and administrators need to take ownership of security and privacy in the classroom. They need to go through a crash course in information security, and they need to start demanding more transparent security from the tools they use and from the education technology companies they deal with. Parents need to start asking questions. Parents need to set up a time to talk to their kids' teachers, to their school tech coordinators, to administrators, and anybody else who can answer questions about how data is stored and how data is secured. Hackers, they can help too. We need more open source software in schools that gives educators and schools more options and more ability to customize the software that can fit their needs. Additionally, this would give educators way more options to use in the classroom and wouldn't put student data at risk of being sold for profit. Security researchers need to be more persistent, and they need to demand more and better channels for responsible disclosure. Security research could go a long, long way in making the tools used in classrooms safer. In addition to this, lawmakers, policymakers, and technologists need to get it together. They need to create standards for educational data storage and transmission. Companies will hate this, but it will work. There needs to be a limit to the amount of time the data is stored and how easy that data is to access. Not everything needs to be at our fingertips all of the time until the end of all time. There's a massive battle going on right now between organizations who are focused on defending student privacy pretty much to the death. But without better security in each of these places and clear, reliable information instead of fear and uncertainty and doubt, we're not going to be able to secure student data and to give students the privacy that they really, really deserve. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for attending, guys. Thank you to my mentor, Dan. Also, thank you, Brendan, for helping me out. And can we please go hack this, pretty please, so that our kids and my potential future child does not have to have its poor information sold, leaked, and put all over the internet.